Hi everybody. Now, someone calls you and says, you can borrow my McLaren for a week to do whatever you like. That, even for me, is a dream come true. But in today's video, I'm going to be telling you how that dream became a nightmare. So, before we begin proper, a little bit of context for my newer viewers. About 5 years ago, a pair of very good friends of mine, a father and son, bought themselves new McLarens, a 570S and a 720S, both of which came from McLaren Manchester. I'd been invited to go along with them, not in my capacity as a then fairly small YouTuber, but simply as their friend. I was going to chauffeur them up and do a little video of the day, mostly really for them as a little memento of the occasion. You know, picking up a new supercar is always an event, and to do so with your dad, that's a really, really nice thing. However, it very quickly became clear that it was an utter and total shambles. When we arrived, the cars weren't there. When they did appear, one of them was damaged, one of them hadn't been properly PDI'd, all sorts of stuff went on. And this didn't stop. Over the next few months, an increasing number of things happened, each of which was more unbelievable than the last, until it got to the point that one of the cars, the 570, wound up being rejected and replaced with a 600 LT. Now, because I'd done reviews on both of these cars, in real time, this process had taken months. But in YouTube time, I was going to do one video saying, hey, here's my friend James's new 570S. And then on Wednesday, I was going to do a video saying, hey, everybody, here's my friend James's new 600 LT. I thought that needed a little bit of explanation, and as neither father nor son had been getting anywhere with McLaren at that point, they said, yeah, sure, go ahead, make a video, tell the story of this ludicrous saga that really had soured this previously joyous ownership experience. So I did. And the video became a hit. Now, at that point, my channel had less than 50,000 subscribers, and I'd never have a video do more than 350,000 views. And that had only happened the once. But this one did nearly 800,000 views in a month and took me to just shy of 100K. It is fair to say that in a lot of ways, that video kinda made the channel. And it was a hot potato in the world of McLarens for quite some time. But though I am always, of course, thankful for what that video did, I was also always a little bit upset that that had been the video for which I became better known. I didn't want to be known as the guy that moaned about cars, McLarens in particular, because if you ever watched any review I'd done of a McLaren car, I've always really liked the product. It just so happens that the product doesn't always work, and in this instance, when it didn't, the company didn't always take good care of its customers. But still, the reputation stuck, and I am still known best to most people as McLaren Hater of the Year 2019 and 2020. And I always really wanted to try and improve that image and really promote the good side of McLaren, because they really do have one. It's an amazing and interesting company with a brilliant heritage that I'm happy now to have actually dealt with a little bit more in recent years. And of course, there are many, many good people, both at Woking and also in owners groups, who I know do actually understand me and the fact that I don't want to do them any harm. But also, when companies like this fail their customers, I think they should be held to account. And it was with this in mind that last year I asked my good friend Guy if I could borrow his 720S, a car that he'd just picked up because, like many of us, he'd been looking at the prices of 720s in the classifieds and thinking, these are a bargain. After all, you have a car here that weighs effectively the same as a lightweight special Ferrari, but still has an interior, a stereo, and other creature comforts. It's got billionaire doors and a 720 horsepower twin-turbo V8. It'll do 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds and go on to a top speed of nearly 220 miles an hour. And all of this can be yours for the price of a sort of modestly specified 911 Carrera S. To me, even with McLaren's reputation, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer. And though I've driven many McLarens over the years, I haven't often had a chance to live with one for any extended period of time. And trust me, I have emailed McLaren PR on a number of occasions, but for some reason they just don't seem very keen on engaging with me. Luckily, many customers don't feel the same way, and my good friend Michael on a number of occasions has lent me his 12C. But that is the beginning of the McLaren story. This is chapter 2, and a very significant car for them. So I was excited when Guy said, "Yes, James, of course you can." He'd previously lent me his Aston Martin V8, the 1980s one, which I really enjoyed, and he's got a number of other interesting cars. I in fact own what was formerly his F12. He's a really properly passionate petrolhead that cares about his machinery. So I knew that this was going to be a good example. Unfortunately, last year something happened which meant this car was off the road for a little while. It was involved in a very minor incident which resulted in a little bit of damage to the front corner of the car, but because it had to go through insurance companies, like anything that goes through insurance companies, it took a lot longer than you would expect that it should. And by the time the car was ready, it was winter, not of course appropriate timing to give a proper evaluation of a car with performance potential such as this. And so we said, yes, okay, let's wait until the following summer and we will get things sorted. So a couple of months ago, the day finally rolled around and I came by Guy's to pick up his car. Now, he lives a very long way from me, about a 4-hour drive in fact, but conveniently at that time I'd been over filming at Hartech, who are a little bit closer to him. And as he lives roughly on the way from there to mine, I said, could I come and get it in the evening? He said, yeah, no problem whatsoever. My friend Chris dropped me off at the house, I grabbed the keys and set off. Now, it was 10 o'clock at night. I had a long, near 300-mile journey ahead of me, and so I thought, right, let's just get the car home, enjoy it, take it easy, sensibly. I've got loads of time before I have to put my foot down and really find out what this car is capable of. Let's simply get back and get to sleep. And for the first hour, everything went brilliantly. The car was amazing. The first few yards were a little bit unusual and I thought something felt a little bit off, but I immediately put that down to the fact that for the 4 days previous, I had been driving a 20-year-old Jaguar XJ. In truth, having not driven a 720 for a while, I was giving far more thought to just how incredible this car is. Not only how easy it is to drive, considering it's a car with such performance, but also how good the visibility is, how comfortable the seats are, how nice the steering is, and just really taking in everything about this car. And you know, I was starting to think, oh dear, this is going to cost me a lot of money, because I was thinking, you know, I might just have to get one of these. It really is that good. And it was all going swimmingly until about an hour in. I was on the approach to a roundabout on a very ordinary piece of British B road. It was straight before, straight after, 60-mile-an-hour limit, excellent visibility. I was slowing down, I got to about 20 mile an hour or so, and then there was an awful noise. It sounded like I just run over a set of spanners. It was hideous, very metallic, quite loud, and came from the front end of the car. About 20 minutes earlier, I thought that I'd run over a stick, and I worried maybe had that got lodged somewhere, gone into the wheel or something like that. I was panicking and thinking, oh my God, what have I done to Guy's car? Oh my God, I'm an hour in and I've broken his McLaren. Oh no, what's going to happen now? But at the same time, I also noticed that something happened with the steering. So whereas before, to go straight, you held it like that, now I was just holding it like this and still going straight. I was at the roundabout by this point, so I got round the roundabout and something about the car felt very off. Luckily, on the other side of it, I spotted a lay-by, so I immediately went to pull into it. I then put my foot down on the brake pedal, and as I did, the car lurched right, went into the oncoming lane, which fortunately was totally clear of traffic at that time. And at that point, I knew something was definitely very wrong with the car suspension. I came to a stop, and when I opened the door and got out, put the torch on my phone. I expected to see one of the wheels hanging off or something else rather dramatic. But I walked around the car, couldn't see anything obviously wrong. I immediately phoned Guy to tell him that something had happened to his car and that I would deal with it and sort it out. Unfortunately, at that point, I had no ride home left at his because Chris had taken my car. So whatever happened, really, I needed, if possible, to get this home. Now, I knew at this point I wasn't going to be driving it, but I had another problem. This was an unilluminated piece of road. At 11 o'clock at night, it was pitch black, but there was still a reasonable amount of traffic. I was constantly getting flashed by cars and lorries oncoming who thought that I was simply in the middle of the road with no lights on. And after the fourth lorry thundered past, almost taking off the wing mirror of the car, I thought, you know what, this is just not safe. There was nowhere very clear for me to be able to get off the road, and I figured something was going to happen to either myself, the car, or potentially both fairly soon. So pulled out Google Maps, and luckily 3/4 of a mile down the road there was a McDonald's. I figured it's going to have a car park, so let's limp the car there, which I managed to do at about 15 miles an hour. And the whole time the thing was crabbing when you turned, moving in very, very disconcerting ways. Got it to the car park, and luckily it was a 24 hours McDonald's, which also had in it one of my channel fans. So yes, hello, if that was you, thank you for coming out and keeping me occupied. I called the AA and knew at this point it was going to be a very long night, because when you have a car such as this, a lot of people don't want to come out and look at it, and even worse, you'll often get an AA van come out, look at it and go, oh, it's a McLaren, we can't do anything with that, we'll phone you a recovery truck, and they've just wasted an hour of everybody's time. Fortunately for me, that isn't what happened at all. A proper, decent recovery truck came up with one of those nice fancy beds that drops off the back, and the chap proceeded to load up the car. And while he was doing that, he called me over and he said, oh, I have found your problem. And he handed me this. This is a bolt from the car's front wishbone, and it had come out. Now, I am sure it is obvious to all watching, but the potential consequences of that happening could have been severe. Only 10 seconds before it happened, I was doing 60 miles an hour. 10 seconds afterwards, I would have been doing 60 miles an hour. And 10 minutes later, I would have been joining the motorway and doing 70 miles an hour on a slip road that has quite a curve to it. And had it happened then, I almost certainly would have come off the road in the car. And my first thought was, oh my word, how lucky am I? Because if that had happened, people would have seen it, people would have filmed it, and the headlines I could already see. James Martin, Matt Armstrong's somebody else's McLaren 720S. I mean, I'm not sure if I would believe somebody if they said in the middle of the night on an empty motorway, they just had an accident with a car like this going in a straight line, and they weren't trying to have fun. But believe me, I really wasn't having fun at this point. But there was also very little I could do about it. As the car was in my possession, I felt responsibility for it, and I also, as already mentioned, needed to get home. Guy was then not going to be available for quite a while anyway, so I said, okay, right, here's the plan. I'm going to follow the car back to my house, and from there, hopefully, we can deal with the issue. Now, the journey home in of itself was an ordeal, and it's the first time I actually really feel a little bit let down by the AA, who previously have been really quite good. The first leg of the journey was okay. I got from where I was to the next big motorway services about an hour down the road. They then dropped me off, and a young lad called MJ appeared in a pretty small van with a little regular tail on the back. Forgive me, I forget and I mix up all of the terms of the different ends of vans. I don't really deal with them all that much, but you know what I mean, the tipper type thing. And we all looked at that and went, I'm not really sure that's gonna get on, but with about 10 or 15 minutes worth of trying and many wooden planks, we did indeed get it on, and MJ took me another hour or so down the road to some services near Corby. However, as I was being dropped off there, I got a phone call from the AA who said, oh, yeah, by the way, because of all the incidents from the bank holiday, which had been a week earlier, there's actually nobody available to get you now, and you're probably going to be there for at least 4 hours. At this point, it was 3 a.m. I'd only got halfway home, and I'd been on the go since 7 a.m. the previous morning. I was shattered. I was also at what appeared to be the world's worst motorway services. There was a Greggs and a Burger King. Both of those were shut. There wasn't actually even a petrol station there, but there was a travel lodge, which I went into and asked if they had a room spare, because it was obvious I was going to be there for a while. And after about 15 minutes of talking to the computer, luckily I was told, yes, we did have one room remaining. Would you like it? Yes, please. Thank you very much. And I actually spent most of the night sort of A, worrying about what on earth was going to happen to the car, and B, whether I was going to miss the phone call from the AA, who maybe had found a truck a little earlier than expected. And the last thing I wanted to happen was to then wake up in the morning and find out that actually a truck driver had turned up, had tried to call me, and couldn't get in touch. So he just went away. But luckily at 7 o'clock, with basically not much warning, an AA truck did turn up, collected me, and finally took me home. And then I started thinking, what on earth am I going to do? I got some proper sleep in, then decided to phone Guy and make a plan. Now, I know that McLaren have a terrible reputation for build quality, and I know I'm probably partly responsible for it being so widespread. However, even I don't believe that McLaren would put a bolt on a car not correctly done up. And even if they had, this car's got over 20,000 miles on it. It would have fallen out long ago. The fact was, the car had only been back from its repair for a month, in which Guy had done 1,000 miles on a road trip. So the balance of probability dictated that whatever happened here started then. Now, 2 companies worked on the car during that period. First off, Chartwells of Derby, the supercar body shop, accredited repairer to just about any brand you can name. And they, along with HRO and Body Technics, are generally regarded as probably the most expensive, but also one of the best places to take a car such as this, particularly if your insurance company is going to be paying for it. However, they had done no work to this corner of the car because it simply wasn't necessary. They'd done stuff over there, not here. After the car was done with them though, it then went to Guy's McLaren dealer to have both a service and also just a general checkover and MOT. During which process it was identified that some of the bushes of the upper offside front wishbone did need doing. So that came out, was done, car was MOT serviced and returned to him. And the dealer he'd taken it to, Manchester. And I thought, oh no, please no, just anybody but them. I started this because I wanted to try and improve the reputation of McLaren. The whole point of having this car was to try and do some nice, decent, positive stuff. And now here I am with a broken car that's just been to the last place that I ever wanted to have to talk about ever again. But I thought, right, it's a long time ago, and I personally have no issue at all with any of the people at McLaren Manchester, and the service guys there were generally pretty decent. So I phoned them, and I thought I'll phone them because as soon as they hear what's happened to this car, they're going to want to deal with it. I didn't want Guy to have to spend any more on getting this sorted than he strictly had to. Even though Manchester are the other side of the country to me, I thought when you hear as a business that something like this has happened to a car that you've just worked on, you're going to want to put it right. And in my head, I thought as soon as I phone them up, speak to the head of service, he's going to say, oh, crikey blimey, that's terrible. We're so glad nothing bad really happened. We're sending a driver right now. He's going to collect it. It's all going to be sorted. But instead what happened was I phoned them up and said what had happened to which car, and he said, oh, no, we didn't touch lower wishbone. No, not us. Right. Well, that complicates things then, doesn't it? In the interests of due diligence, I decided to phone a few friends who knew the world of McLaren well and ask them, had Manchester been truthful with me, is it really possible to remove and work on the upper wishbone without touching or disturbing the lower? And that is where the bolt had come from. Helpfully, one of them said, yeah, no, easy to do that, not a problem. But two others said, no way, you definitely have to get the lower off in order to access the upper. Make of this information what you will. So, having not got anywhere there, I spoke to Guy and said, well, the only other people that have touched the car in the recent past are Chartwells. Do you want me to speak to them? And he said, no, that's okay. Technically, because this was an insurance job that Chartwells did, the client is actually the insurance company, so we'll get them to deal with it. They surely will be able to get results much quicker. So I thought, yeah, cool, no problem. But I still had the issue that on my driveway was a McLaren that wasn't really safe to drive. So I figured the sensible thing to do would be to try and get it into a dealer or specialist of some kind. In my head, yes, a bolt's fallen out, that's really bad, could have been worse, but it's also something really, really simple. Surely we put bolt back in, make sure it's done correctly this time, and then everything will be fine. I'd identified that there was a little bit of damage to the arch where the wishbone had been somewhere it shouldn't have been. I wasn't sure if there was damage also to the leveling sensor, but overall it seemed like it was generally fairly okay. So I rang a couple of different places, V Engineering, who are very good, but also unfortunately very busy, and then my local McLaren dealer, which is still a long way from the house, that's Hatfield. And they actually, got to give them credit, they were amazing. They said, yeah, you know what, if it's just a quick look at the car and put a bolt back in, we'll see you next week. Thank you guys, thank you so much. So I got in touch with my friends at We Move It Limited, the only people I go to for moving cars around, and they came out, we picked up the car and went over to Hatfield. And then possibly my favourite part of this entire saga happened. So we pull up at Hatfield with the car on the back of the trailer. The last time I'd been there was about 5 years earlier, and at that point in time, their building hadn't been constructed. They were operating out of what was a glorified porter cabin. Now they had this lovely, great big glass construction next to an Aston Martin dealer and with a whole bunch of other car dealers around the corner. Car dealerships, they're like buses and betting shops. They travel in packs. And I walked into this lovely monolith, and it was empty, completely empty. There was 2 cars in there, maybe 3, big TV in the corner with the FTSE index going on it, and not a soul in sight. It was really, really quite eerie. But eventually somebody did pop out and said, hello, how can we help? And I said, right, we've got a car on a trailer here. Where is your service department? Because sometimes with these places, the sales and service can actually be quite far away, and I didn't want to unload and then have to reload the car. And he said, oh, it's just around the back. It's like 200 yards down the road. You can drop the car off there. Does it drive? I said, yeah, no, it drives. It's fine. I'm just a little bit concerned, you know, that a wheel might fall off of it or something daft. And he said, oh, yeah. No, don't worry. We know who you are. That's cool. That's fine. No, you'll be all right. Just unload the car there. So we get the car unloaded. A few minutes later, sales guy comes out. He says, oh, yeah, hi, Gary. Let's call him Dave, shall we? And I said, Gary? See, you're Gary. I was like, No, I'm not Gary. He said, oh, you got the McLaren with the wheels falling off. I was like, yes, I do. I said, who do you think I am and why do you think I'm here? And he goes, oh, well, we have got one customer and wheel bolts on his car weren't torqued correctly. That's not you then? I was like, no, that's not me. And I must say, I found this sort of somewhat entertaining because I was just suddenly dropped 5 years back into the past with this just comedy of errors that is dealing with anything McLaren. But no, we then did proper introductions, and he was relieved to learn that actually this was certainly nothing to do with them, and they were there really to help me. And they did me a massive favour. I cannot state that enough. So the car went out the back, went up on the ramp, and up until this point, I had also been thinking, we knew that one bolt had fallen out of the car, but I thought that couldn't cause my problem. You see, the suspension design in these is, okay, kind of complicated with the interconnected hydraulics and everything, but it's also quite simple. It's double wishbone. So you've got wishbone here, and each of these points that connects to a car has 2 bolts in it. So you've got 4 on each connecting to the subframe. So 1 bolt falling out shouldn't have been able to let the wishbone go as loose as it did. The thing sat like an inch proud of the subframe. And I just thought, no, this can't be right. It must be more than 1 bolt that's fallen out. And turns out I was right, because when they got it on the ramp and inspected it, they found the other bolt just parked neatly on the subframe. So actually, when I picked the car up and I thought it felt a little bit weird, actually it might have done. It may well have been that one of these bolts was either out already or had been working its way loose, and then what I actually felt was the other one at last letting go. So the geometry of the car would have been getting progressively worse the whole time, but in a reasonably subtle way, and with me not pushing the car and not being familiar, I just hadn't noticed. And to be honest, up until the point this fell out, it really wasn't anywhere near that bad. And this did raise a few questions, as you might imagine, but still no answers were in sight. Unfortunately, even though they were very happy to put 2 new bolts back into the car, there should be, basically, where these go in the bottom of the wishbone then goes here, but between the subframe and here should be a shim. And that shim had fallen out. But it's a factory shim, a chassis shim, I think they called it. And because they don't fall out on their own, they don't keep them in stock because they don't need to. So they said, we're really sorry, but we can put these back in. Your car will be safe to drive. The geometry will be compromised, but to get it home, you should be fine. Just please don't take it on a track day or anything silly like that. So I said, yeah, fine. Okay, not a problem. We booked in to have the car looked at about a month later, and we were going to order in the shim, which was not expensive. And they sent me on my merry way, and they did not charge me for the privilege. And so Hatfield, gotta say, thumbs up. Very, very happy with that service, because they knew I was in a bit of a bind, and they absolutely could have charged me a fortune just to look at the car and put the bolts in, and I couldn't have argued about that, but they didn't. So yeah, points to them. So by this point, I've now achieved something. We've worked out what has happened and how to fix it. The damage also looks to be fairly contained. In reality, the total bill for fixing the car is probably going to be around the 3-figure mark. We need those shims, they're like 20, 30 quid. We need a new arch liner, which is going to be a bit more, and the car likely needs a new geometry setup done. That's going to be another £300 or £400. That's it. Compared with what could have happened, the whole car could have been lost and someone could have been hurt. Actually, this is a pretty darn good day. And every time I spoke to anybody about this, they told me how lucky I was. But every time I was told how lucky I was more determined to work out how the heck this had happened in the first place. Because my thinking was this: anybody that could put 1 bolt in wrong can surely do another. So at some point, somewhere, a failing has happened. And it's either at Manchester or Chartwell's. There is still the outside possibility this could have happened at factory, but personally, I just don't buy that. Now, while this was all happening, Guy had been trying to get in touch with Chartwell's via the insurance company, and things weren't really progressing. At one point, they even wanted to send out an inspector to look at the car, and I wasn't really ever sure why. I mean, the bolts fell out of the suspension. We've got photographic evidence of that. Hatfield inspected the car, confirmed that there wasn't any bolts in that end of the lower wishbone, but there were now, because we put them back in, and these are horrible cars to try and inspect anyway, unless it's on a ramp and you can get all the under trays off. I mean, I really didn't know what their aim was with that. I think they were just working on autopilot. Over the course of the next few weeks, a few emails were exchanged, and the general consensus seemed to be that Chartwell's felt like this wasn't their responsibility either, and that they hadn't done anything to the front end of the car and it wasn't their problem. But meanwhile, I had been speaking to another good friend of mine, Nick, who also had experience of Chartwell's, and he said, this doesn't sound like them to me. They are a family-owned and run company. He knew some of the people that worked there, not as friends, but simply from a business perspective. And he said, they care about the quality of their work. They're really good. I take my cars there for a reason. So I thought, well, this isn't tallying up with me. On one hand, I've got a friend that I know and trust telling me this is a good company, they care. And on the other hand, I've got somebody who I know and trust telling me that he's being told that it's not their problem and nobody really wants to deal with it. But I personally didn't want anybody to have to pay for something that they didn't do. And the one person I knew who was innocent in all of this was Guy, because he hadn't done anything to his car other than try and enjoy it. So, frustrated, and a couple of weeks ahead of this car going into Hatfield, at which point we would have had to have paid for it because, you know, it's definitely not Hatfield's problem either. I said, right, Guy, do you mind if I try my approach? And he said, you know what? We're not getting anywhere trying to do it properly and officially. Go for it. So I phoned Chartwell's up, said, hello, I've got this car, it's not mine, but you've worked on it and it belongs to somebody that I know, and there's been a bit of a problem. I'm told that something has happened and it's not your fault, but I think maybe it is. I did a Karen, basically. I said, can I speak to the manager? Let's just stop arse farting about, let's get this done. But unfortunately, he wasn't available. I was, however, given his details and said, right, here's the best way to get in touch with him, send him an email and he'll get back to you. And my thoughts at that point really were, yeah, cool, great, okay, excellent way to get rid of me. I'll send an email and we will again be going nowhere. So I drew up the email, explained whose car it was, why it wasn't with him, why I had it, a little bit about who I was, what I do, and not in a sort of like, you'll hear from me about this way, just like a, look, I've got this car to do a piece on it, this has happened, obviously it's bad, I am trying to get to the bottom of what's happened, and I'm being told that you guys feel like you aren't responsible. Can you please confirm for me if that's true? If you're really telling me that you have not touched this bit of the car? Because then if you're saying that, I've got to look elsewhere for the root cause of the problem. 2 hours later, I get a phone call from the MD, lovely guy called Chris. And he says to me, James, I got your email. This is the first that I've heard about it. And I believe that. He'd already spoken to some of his people, tried to work out what had happened. But the short version of this is that he said, right, look, genuinely, hand on heart, I cannot tell you definitively whether we did or did not deal with that bit of the car. I know we did stuff over here and stuff over here, but here, there's nothing on the logs. But we did, of course, do an inspection of the car. And maybe while we're doing that inspection, we took stuff off and put it back on. And yes, okay, Manchester dealt with it after us, and there's a chance that maybe they did it. But we definitely worked on the car. And therefore, we have a responsibility to make it right. And at that point, the clouds parted, sunlight came in, and I just thought, oh my word, where was this attitude when we needed it 5 years ago? This company, now, it genuinely, hand on heart, there's a good chance, I would say more than a good chance, that they didn't cause this problem, but still, they were happy to take care of it. And so they organised for the car to be collected, taken away, fixed. They sorted everything. They put all new bolts in it. They even rechecked the torque settings on all of their tools. And they did everything, including stuff they didn't need to do. They replaced the arch liner to fix the damage that had been caused. They did everything, and they returned the car to me at zero cost to anybody but themselves. Now, 5 years ago, when I made these videos, and this is something I've said before and since, there is a big, big difference between fault and responsibility. Now, of course, if something is your fault, it is your responsibility to deal with it. But sometimes you do have to take responsibility for things, even if they aren't your fault. Any parents watching, I'm sure, will know what it is that I'm talking about. But in the world of cars, even cars like this, finding companies that are willing to put their hands in their head and go, yep, you know what, that might have been us, maybe it wasn't us, but because maybe it was, we're going to deal with it anyway. Manchester the whole time just said, nah. And in fact, when I called Manchester that first time, the guy didn't stop and say, you know what, I need to ask a tech, or let me check the records. He just told me immediately, no, we didn't touch that. So I will allow you to draw your own conclusions based on what you've heard. Although, I must say, when the guy from Chartwells did come to pick it up in a nice, professional, enclosed trailer, the battery had run flat. And that was a nightmare, nearly worth a video itself. But I'm not going to bore you with that. The important thing, though, is that I am utterly and totally delighted to say that, yes, something bad happened that could have been much, much worse. And it was an awful, awful start to my experience of living with this car. But now it is back. I am using it. I'm going to have it for about 2 weeks, I think, in total, because Guy is an incredibly understanding man. He hasn't had access to his own car for 2 months, so I could have perfectly understood that he wanted it straight back. But no, he still wants me to be able to make the content on it and do a nice, fair and honest appraisal of it. And as you probably worked out by now, this story alone was maybe a little bit too long to just include in my other living with video. So yeah, there we have it. I really honestly have had the whole McLaren experience. I mean, I know it's what I signed up for, but I just never in my wildest dreams did I think that would happen. I mean, I haven't even heard of this thing happening on a car for a very, very long time. But there we go. Anyway, that's another tale of woe from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. And don't forget, hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.